Hey friends, welcome back. Today we have another letter from the Flower Letters. This is letter number 3. I got a comment on my original Flower Letters video where they were kind of requesting that I read more of the letter because they were saying that reading a little snippet of it doesn't give you enough of a idea of this subscription. So what I'm going to do actually is read this entire letter. Now, if you recall, or if you haven't, please go to my last video where I set up my journal to capture these flower letters. But if you recall, I put letters 1 and 2 in here, and we have the Lily Clara Moore series. In letter 1, there was a matrimonial ad that was put out by Mr. Gambit, and then I journaled about that. In letter number 2, we had a Pinkerton ad to hire a detective. So the story's getting a little spicier. Here we are with letter number 3. It looks like we have a few pieces of mail. This is a postcard. Nice. What's this? An ad for painkiller to home physician for coughs, colds, croup, and consumption. What the doctors say. Dr. Wilson and Ward, physicians and druggists, right from Centreville, Tennessee. Okay. Usually they've been including these little pieces of ephemera, but they don't actually relate to the story. So I'm just gonna put that to the side. Here we have a bonnet detail. The dress is constructed from silk, lace, chiffon, and... You know what? We're gonna read the letter first, and then we'll see if any of those items make sense. April 15, 1884. Katie, darling, I know I promised to mail you a letter at every station along my journey west. But if I'm being honest, there hasn't been enough to write about. I think... Who's Katie? Okay, it's from Lily Clara, and I think it's her sister, because she wrote to Mr. Gambit in the first letter about, like, if she marries him, he has to make arrangements for her sister. So, okay. Even now, I'm at a loss to tell you anything interesting. The scenery is the same, except for the skies, of course. The skies are wide open and bluer than you can imagine. Yet this has not turned out to be the adventure I was hoping for. In fact, I'm growing quite restless. With all the stories I've heard and read about the Wild West, I suppose I assumed there would be at least a little adventure along the way. I really don't have anything to complain about, of course. I didn't realize what Sylvester was providing when he told me to purchase a first-class ticket until the porter showed to me my own private and sumptuously decorated sleeper car. Honestly, there's velvet and silk everywhere on this train. I'm sure you would love it. I'll see if I can convince Sylvester to write enough for a first-class ticket when I send for you. Oh, so he's rich. Nice. How are you feeling? Caselmo Quadra... I don't know what that is. Okay. How is the air in Mott Haven today? Are you taking your treatments and drinking your coffee like Dr. Frisbee recommended? If he hears of any new or better treatments, please use the money I left you. So, like I said in previous videos, the text in pink, you can find the definition of online at the Flower Letters website. Personally, I would prefer if they just included the definitions as a footnote because I don't really want to go and open my computer and have to read it. But for now, we're just going to go with context clues. I'm assuming drinking coffee, like some doctor recommended, is intended as a medicinal treatment back in the day. If he hears of any new or better treatments, please use the money I left you. I know what you'll say to this, of course, but Sylvester won't mind. Besides, who needs that much money for a trousseau, even at New York prices? Even if he does mind, which he won't, he'll have to take it up with me. After all, he did say there's plenty more where that came from, so I'm not the least bit worried about it. I've been thinking about what we discussed before I left, and I agree with you. I know you don't like the smoking treatment Dr. Frisbee recommended. It seems to me that cigar smoke would only make things worse since the smoke from the factories bothers you so much. My vote is you discontinue that one. But please, dearest, keep doing all the rest and keep taking good care of yourself until I can send for you. Since the trip has been uneventful, I've spent most of the time in my cabin putting the final touches on my wedding attire. I know you'll want to see the additions, so I've included a final sketch with the embroidery design I added. Oh, okay, so I think this is the embroidery design of her wedding dress. Access to a parlor and dining car is included with my fare. You can imagine how much I've delighted in that luxury. I'm certain I've never eaten so well. After the first 2 days of eating everything offered me, I was a little worried I wouldn't fit into my wedding dress when I arrive in Frisco. I'm learning to pace myself now. Dining among the rich and mighty has made me very glad I spent some of Sylvester's trousseau money on that fine traveling suit Madame Lovelace displayed in her window this fall. Imagine me trying to look elegant in one of my old calicos. Thankfully, Madame chose me to model the suit in front of the New York debutantes, so I didn't have to alter it a stitch. That gave me time to make up the matching fur-fringed dolman, which has come in handy. Spring or not, it has been glacial since leaving New York. Okay, so there's actually 3 more pages, and what I'm gonna do, I think, is continue reading the story, but do the journaling that I normally do, and I will read the story as a voiceover. So here we have the embroidery design for Lily Clara's wedding dress, and you can see it is very detailed in florals and such, and you can also trace this pattern onto your own embroidery project. So that was kind of cool. I'm going to go back to reading the letter. Other than that, I've been extremely comfortable on my journey so far, except for missing you, of course. Please write and assure me all is well, that your lungs have fully cleared and you're still on the mend. I'm ever so worried I left you too soon. Please tell me I gave you enough money for Dr. Frisbee to continue treating you. I'm anxious for you every moment and worry if I've truly made the right decision for us. I must go for now as we're pulling into Chicago Station. I'll finish my letter when we're set off again. Later. Oh, Katie, you will never believe what just happened. As I mentioned before, everything has been far too tranquil for the likes of me, especially since I've been hoping for my own tiny adventure to enjoy before arriving in Frisco and becoming a wife. Well, dearest, adventure has found me at last. There I was, standing on a platform in Chicago, waiting for Sylvester's man to show up and escort me the rest of the way to Frisco. Suddenly, the attention of every passenger on the platform was captured by complete pandemonium at a bend in the tracks. We were all crowded together, as you can imagine, and I was keeping my eye out for pickpockets and alike, so at first it was hard to see the reason for all the shouting. Then a man, obviously inebriated, stumbled out of the crowd, glanced around a moment, and then fixed his bleary eyes on me. He came straight toward me. When he seized my arm, he asked if I was the quote-unquote dumb setting West to marry his boss Gambit. I managed to nod despite my shock, and he proceeded to shove a small box at me, asking me to tell his boss he was sorry and that he'd try to make it back to Frisco soon. Then he just took off running towards the tracks. Before he could reach the end of the platform, however, he was snatched on one side by a giant gentleman with a Malmsey nose, and on the other side by another jimmer-jawed fellow of extremely dubious-looking character. When they began dragging Gambit's poor wretch of a man back the way he came, I finally managed to gather my wits and shouted after them, demanding they release my escort immediately. Now, you know the kind of dodgy characters I've faced in Mott's Haven, but Katie, when these two men turned their steely gazes on me, it sent the worst sort of shivers down my spine. For the first time in my life, I considered backing down, and I would have if the giant fellow had not reached out and grabbed hold of my arm. He said, speaking to my escort, perhaps MacDonald would forgive his debt in exchange for the quote-unquote ginger tart, meaning myself, of course. I'm proud to say he promptly received a slap across the face for that vulgarity. The varmint tried to subdue me in return, but I wasn't about to be used as payment for some strange man's debt, even if he was my intended's employee. So I kicked the giant oaf as hard as I could in the shin, ankle really, as he was enormous, and ran for it. I wasn't 2 steps along before he had hold of me again. I screamed for him to let me go, but Katie, all those people waiting to board the train just pretended like nothing was happening. I wasn't keeping my voice down either. Not a one of them budged to help. I'm not saying I'm surprised at all. People tend to keep themselves to themselves where the fates of strangers are concerned. But it wasn't as if I was dressed like a saloon girl, so I just kept hollering like a cornered alley cat and throwing my fist against the skyser like my life depended on it. I was in the process of being hefted over the man's shoulder like a sack of potatoes when someone finally came to my aid. A man, tall and frightfully well-formed, coffee brown hair and eyes as blue as the wide open sky I've been seeing so much of, stepped out of the crowd. Oh dear, my mouth sets to watering every time I think of the moment. Truly, Katie, he was quite the handsomest man I've ever laid eyes on. Once he'd freed me from the oaf's grasp, he put himself between me and danger and prepared himself for a fight. But when he turned back to confront the villains, the pair of them had already vanished in the crowd with my escort in tow. So, my rescuer, one Mr. Matthew Hickman, saw me safely onto the train to Salt Lake City and informed me those men worked for an Irish mob boss by the name Mike MacDonald, and that I was lucky he came along when he did. Of course, he didn't need to tell me all that. Apparently, this Mr. MacDonald is a villainous mastermind who runs Chicago's underworld and pretty much everyone else in the city. Mr. Gambit's man had most likely been gambling at the store, which is Mr. MacDonald's establishment. Mr. Hickman said that the man probably lost soundly and wasn't likely to get out of town until he'd settled his debts one way or another. So there I was, deprived of my escort just as my journey west was starting to get interesting. Thankfully, fate is on my side today, Katie, because just as that thought entered my mind, Mr. Hickman informed me he too was heading to Salt Lake and, as luck would have it, on to Frisco after that. He wondered if I might accept him as a suitable escort instead. I am certain there isn't a more suitable escort alive, and I told him so. He smiled at that, and what do you think I was rewarded with? The knowledge that our Mr. Hickman has a set of the most darling dimples any man has a right to own. They settle so deep when he smiles, you can even see them through his whiskers. Well, what do you think of that, my Katie? My very first adventure out west. I've always seen myself as too spirited for the quote-unquote damsel in distress type, but I will tell you it's not such a bad spot to be in when the likes of Mr. Matthew Hickman come to your rescue. Oh dear, what am I yammering on about? Burn this letter after you read it, won't you? After all, I am on my way to be married. It's not a sin to admire a handsome, brave man before the event, is it? Speaking of being engaged, that tiny box Mr. Gambit's man shoved at me had a wedding ring in it. Darling, I don't mind one bit telling you it's the ugliest, most gaudy abomination I've ever set my eyes on. You know, I've seen my share of repulsive wedding rings at Madame Lovelace's establishment. I don't mean to sound ungrateful for Mr. Gambit's generosity, of course. Heaven knows how much the center stone alone costs, but I couldn't even bring myself to try it on. Dear me, you know I'm determined to do everything in my power to make happy. But Katie, if wearing that horrid ring is essential to his happiness, I'm afraid we may start our life together with an argument. Don't worry though, I'll be kind. But for sheer practical reasons alone, I won't wear it. How on earth could I handle silk and taffeta and chiffon without shredding them to bits on such a conjugal atrocity? Anyway, do take extra good care of yourself, dearest. Your most affectionate sister, Lily Clara. Alright, well that was the end of letter number 3. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let me know if you prefer this style of video, because I actually am enjoying it. Being able to kind of just not have to talk while I'm creating the artwork in my journal is kind of nice, but also being able to read some of the letters to you guys so that you get a better idea of the story and what you would be getting into if you were to subscribe to this. So let me know in the comments below if this is a style that you enjoy. To recap, letter number 3 was a letter written from Lily Clara Moore to her sister Katie, and it was dated April 15, 1884. It also came with a medicine ad, and my thoughts that I ended up journaling in my notebook about pretty much talked about how this was a pretty long letter, and I prefer the ones where it's actually one page between two people, where like in the previous letters, instead of having them all be from Lily Clara, it was like correspondence back and forth between people. And also I felt that the font was really difficult to read. I know it's supposed to be a modern vintage script, but it was just a little difficult to read sometimes. And then I guess it sounds like her sister Katie is ill, but Miss Lily Clara is infatuated with a Mr. Matthew Hickman. She's supposed to be going to get married to Mr. Gambit, so scandalous. I thought the embroidery pattern that was included in this letter was actually pretty cool, because you can trace it onto fabric or something and do your own pattern, or follow their pattern and make your own embroidery as well, so that was pretty cool. This one also included a postcard. Now for letter number 4, we received a jeweler's ad, we received a postcard, and we also received another letter from Lily Clara to Katie, dated April 27, 1884. Included as well was a Frisco Town Crier newspaper article, and I'm going to read to you what I ended up journaling here. This letter was even better than the last. The last was a little boring. This one is full of crime detail and a surprise plot twist. I did not expect one this early on in the storyline, so I didn't expect a plot twist this early on in the storyline. I want to know what Mr. Gambit's backstory is now. I will say the lynching part was a bit much, especially for a family-friendly story. Like, I kind of feel like maybe somebody in high school and onwards would be able to understand the topic, but yeah, I just thought it was a little strange for them to advertise that this would be fun for your kids and everything. I guess, like, they only have one story that's intentionally written for kids, whereas the rest of it is written towards adults, so just be mindful of, like, if you're sharing this with your smaller children, you might have to explain some things. in the middle of a story. So anyway, since we have the letter, I figured I might as well read some of it until ideally the end of this video. April 27, 1884. My darling Katie, I don't know how to write you this letter, but I know I must, for the consequences of it concerns us both. I've only been in Frisco for one day, but knew I needed to write to you right away. Yet even now, I'm uncertain as to whether I'll be able to afford to post this. You see, contrary to what I had planned upon my arrival in this waterless, heathenistic wilderness, I'm not a married woman, nor do I have any notion of becoming so. I will start at the beginning, dearest, as none of this will make a stitch of sense to you otherwise. After what happened in Chicago, I never dreamed I'd find further adventure on my journey west, but it seems trouble has followed me all the way to Frisco, and in the worst way. We changed trains in Salt Lake City and boarded the Utah Central Railway before heading southwest toward Frisco. We'd been traveling for half the day and were just leaving a town called Leamington when Mr. Hickman and I made our way to the dining car for lunch. Unfortunately, it wasn't a very pleasant lunch, as I finally found the opportunity to tell him I was on my way to Frisco to be married. Okay, this letter, number 4, was actually very good, so I might skip on to letter number 5 just to not ruin the big juicy plot twist. So, we're going to do that. Letter number 5 had a letter from Bill Pinkerton, or to Bill Pinkerton. It also had this kind of map to show the way, but in reality it was a letter from, I think it was Matthew Hickman to his boss, basically. Or no, this was the journal entry. Yeah. The blue one is a letter from Mr. Hickman to Miss Moore. And then the map is a map to show her where his whereabouts are. And of course, we got some more ephemera. I actually just realized that I cannot read letter number 5 either because it would spoil it. So I'd have to read letter number 4 in order for you guys to understand number 5. Darn it. What do I want to do? Maybe I will read up until a certain point for letter number 4. Okay, I had left off where Clara was writing to her sister Katie, and she said, I will start at the beginning, dearest, as none of this will make a stitch of sense to you otherwise. After what happened in Chicago, I never dreamt I'd find further adventure on my journey west, but it seems trouble has followed me all the way to Frisco, and in the worst way. We changed trains in Salt Lake City and boarded the Utah Central Railway before heading southwest toward Frisco. We'd been traveling for half the day and were just leaving a town called Leamington when Mr. Hickman and I made our way to the dining car for lunch. Unfortunately, it wasn't a very pleasant lunch, as I finally found the opportunity to tell him I was on my way to Frisco to be married. He congratulated me, but then excused himself and left the car in such an abrupt manner. I was left wondering how on earth I could have offended him. So much has happened since meeting him, Katie. Mr. Matthew Hickman is the most excellent of gentlemen, and the last person I wish to harm in any way. I had just made up my mind to go after him and make amends if I could, when the train suddenly lurched and the wheels began to squeal, making the most ghastly racket. The next moment, several gunshots were heard. The dining car broke into Utter madness. When I finally managed to enter the next car, rather than finding Mr. Hickman as I had hoped, I'd found myself staring down the barrel of a pistol. A masked bandit shouted for me to get on the floor. I refused, of course. I was wearing my magenta velvet and trifecta patanes. I wasn't about to destroy dozens of hours of some of the finest pleating and embroidery work I'd ever done simply because a meter like himself wanted what was in my handbag. I told him as much, as I tend to do. Of course, if I'd been carrying more than Mr. Gambit's dreadful ring, dearest, I might not have been so brazen. But I ask you, what better way to avoid our first fight as husband and wife than to have his hideous ring stolen? That's when I realized the bandit was just standing there, staring at me. I watched his eyes change from flinty steel to utter bewilderment. Then he lowered his gun. At the time I imagined it was because he'd never had a lady stand up to him before. How wrong I was, Katie. The bandit's hesitation gave me a moment to examine him more closely, and I noticed a strange moon-shaped scar on top of his right wrist. It was outlined by several small dots where stitches had obviously and very clumsily been employed to sew up the wound. Before I noticed any more, Mr. Hickman burst into the car from the opposite end, a pistol in his hand, yelling for the bandit and his 4 other comrades to drop their weapons. The moment the bandits saw Mr. Hickman's Pinkerton badge winking at them from his other hand, they blew past me, scrambling over each other to try and get off the train. To tell you the truth, I was just as shocked as they were. Not once in all our conversation since leaving Chicago had Mr. Hickman even hinted at being a Pinkerton agent. A little bit of backstory. Pinkerton is the detective agency that Mr. Matthew Hickman works for, and he was hired to go handle something, and Lily Clara was going to go up to get married. She seems to be having a little bit of a crush on Mr. Hickman, but then he got all cold when she told him that she was going to get married. So, I don't want to read anymore because, honestly, it might ruin some parts of the story. So we're just gonna hold off. Okay, I actually read a little bit more and I think we can keep going. Mr. Hickman approached me then, asking if I was all right. When I assured him I was, we returned to our seats and spent the rest of our car trip to Frisco in awkward silence. Oh, I feel for her. Oh my gosh. Okay. A Pinkerton agent, Katie. What would he think of me if he knew about Da? What would Da think if he were alive? My confession, compounded by Mr. Hickman's revelation, had all but destroyed the easy, friendly manner that existed between us since Chicago. I don't mind admitting to you that it significantly dampened my spirits. I've since discovered I quite enjoy the company of Mr. Hickman and his lovely Texan-bred manners more than any other man of my acquaintance. She's on her way to get married, but she has a crush on this guy. And obviously, we probably should be shipping them. But anyway, here's a flip through of what it looks like now, including up to 5 letters in my Traveler's Company notebook, regular size. Thank you for watching, and make sure you stay tuned to see more from the flower letters.